We are all vulnerable. That's just a fact of life. And there's never been a more important time for us to fathom our relationship with vulnerability than right now. As a 21st century human, you face fewer physical challenges, fewer physical threats to your life than ever before. And yet there are more abstract threats, emotional threats. Our technological wizardry has allowed us to be aware of events all across the planet, upheaval, volcanoes, social unrest in different places. We are connected, which is wonderful, but that connection also means that we know about things that we can do nothing about. This information is coming at us all the time in a variety of different ways. We're also aware of other abstract threats. We understand that there's this thing called surveillance capitalism, where someone's tracking you on your computer and paying attention to what you buy and what you look at so they can market to you. And there's a feeling of being watched. And similarly with social media, there's pressure on us. There's these images being sent to us and that we're feeling that we need to live up to. There's climate change. There's larger issues in our world that create a feeling of vulnerability in us at a level that we've never had before as a species. And if we don't address this experience of vulnerability, we're at risk of being paralyzed by anxiety or despair and hopelessness. We need to yield to the truth of our vulnerability. Vulnerability is a fact of life. I like to call it the fact of life because if you're alive, by definition, there's a, shelf life on that. And so we're all going to die. But even more every day, we face limits to control over things. We're affected by forces outside of us. That is the nature of being human and being alive. And if I speak to people about vulnerability, some people will deny vulnerability or think of it as weakness, but most people have an understanding that, yep, that's true, we're vulnerable. But their understanding, our understanding, I'm going to include myself in that group, most of the time is that vulnerability is sort of an abstract truth. It's kind of like this abiding, flowing ocean that's behind me that I'm not really looking at. Yeah, I know I'm vulnerable, but it doesn't really mean anything. And yet, in reality, vulnerability is more than a fact. It's also a feeling. In a moment when your longing bumps up against your limit to being able to make that thing, situation, person, whatever, happen the way you want, right in that moment, that abiding, oceanic, abstract fact suddenly becomes immediate and personal and physical. Right in that moment, vulnerability goes from being an idea or a concept to being a feeling in your body. And that feeling is something I call unrest. It's a sharp spike of nervous system activation that's signaling you, calling you home to this precise moment, to enter in to the feeling as it flows in your body so that you can soothe the animal of you and feel the emotions that want to help you come to terms with the limits to your control over things that matter to you. This is a remarkably difficult thing to do. We are wired to move away from our inner experience the moment unrest stirs for all sorts of important reasons that have to do with how our nervous systems are wired, how our childhoods went, even things in our culture, values in our culture that say that we need to avoid vulnerability. And yet, if we don't come home in that moment, we are missing out on the optimal moment for growth. Vulnerability gives us a gift. in the experience of unrest because it signals us right in the optimal moment that we come home. If we come home and soothe the body, we can grow. We can become more of who we are deeply meant to be. It is painful to long for something and not be able to make it so. And perhaps, as I'm saying that, some people are railing against that. What do you mean? I can make things happen. I just have to try hard, work hard, do my best. And I would say, absolutely, do all of those things. And hopefully, a lot of the time, you will get what you want. You will be able to achieve your aims. But the reality is, even if that happens, there were forces outside your control that contributed to that outcome. There were things that went along with you. In fact, our world is so benign, the universe is so friendly to us that a lot of the time we can go through life thinking that we actually nailed it 100% with no help from anybody, right? And yet when we do slow down and look deeply, we realize that in any given moment, right in the middle of this video as I'm speaking to you right now, I could have an aneurysm in my brain and die. I mean, I don't mean to distress myself or you, but that is an abiding, ongoing fact. And there are 10,000 other things. I have a little dog in the background that I'm really hoping won't start barking at the postman as I'm speaking to you. So there are big and little vulnerabilities all the time. And, thank goodness that a lot of the time things work out the way we want. I wish that for you and for me and for all of us. And when they don't, when there are limits, when my reach, and I give it all I've got, doesn't actually obtain the result that I want, when I'm confronted with the fact that my efforts don't 100% single-handedly secure the outcome, in that moment, I need a lot of compassion. In that moment, if I can stay present with myself, if I can love myself right there in the place of I can't, that is a transformational moment. That's when most of us want to just get away from ourselves. We want to deny our longing for something. Oh, didn't matter, didn't really want it anyway. Or we want to deny our limits. Just try harder, you lazy person, you should have done better. Either of those defenses, we call them in psychodynamic therapy, but either of those exits from the truth create suffering. And they take us down a path either toward anxiety and worry, over control, or down another path where we feel hopeless and despairing and feel like, what's the point? Right down the middle is this incredible invitation to matter in your body. I like to say matter in your matter, right in the moment that you are confronted with limits to control over what you want. Rather than only loving yourself when you're at the top of your game, you love yourself on your knees, having to yield, to surrender to the truth that you're not in control. And that is a remarkable thing, because if you can do that, if you can love yourself in the place of I can't, that is an unconditional love that changes everything inside. That even though you can't make something happen, you still matter. Even though the outcome isn't in your hands, there is still something you can do, which is to bring compassion and care toward yourself in that moment. That when something doesn't work out, you don't die. I know that sounds melodramatic, but, in a kind of a light way, people will say, I would die if I don't get that job. I'll die if that person rejects me, So somewhere in us, there is this feeling of how threatening it is to not be able to have what we want and to make things happen the way we want. So my invitation to you is to open your heart to this moment when unrest stirs, to look for it, to look for that quiver of unrest in your body and to embrace it as an invitation to come home right in that moment, to love yourself in the place of I can't. Your vulnerability is what makes you radiant and beautifully human. And if you can love yourself there, you can grow into the most authentic, resilient, and connected self that you're meant to be.